Well, hello everybody, and welcome back to Bo Maths. Last time we talked about how addition and subtraction are really just kind of the same thing, where they both represent shifting, as we saw on the number line, right, moving it back and forth, but they just represent doing it in opposite directions. So we were able to convert from one to the other by introducing a negative sign. So we're going to be practicing that concept today so that you can get more comfortable with it, because it's a very important concept from arithmetic that we'll be using a lot in algebra. All right, so the first one says solve these using a number line. All right, so we'll take a number line. If we look, we can do A and B using the same shift to the number line, right, because they're both subtracting -1. And we can do C and D with the same shift to the number line because they're adding -2. All right, so for number 1, A was 3 minus -1, and B is 2 minus -1. So we know that subtracting a number meant shifting the number line to the left, right? However, when we introduced subtracting a negative, that meant we would be shifting it in the opposite direction, since subtracting this negative here meant we're going to be moving in the opposite direction from which we normally do. So normally we'd move left, but now we're going to be moving to the right. So we will move this to the right by 1. So we do that. So that is subtracting -1. But since it's moving to the right by 1, that's also the same as adding 1, right? So we're going to see here that our 3 lines up with 4, and our 2 lines up with 3, since 2 plus 1 is 3, and 3 plus 1 is 4, which is also the same as this subtracting by -1. So we get 3 minus -1 is 4, and 2 minus -1 is 3. Since it's the same as addition. All right, perfect. So now let's do part C and D. So C and D are adding by -2. All right, so we're going to be adding -2 to this number line. But what does adding -2 look like? Well, adding normally shifts us to the right. However, because we're adding a negative here, we have to do the opposite of what we would normally do. So instead of moving 2 to the right, we're going to be moving 2 to the left. And that is, of course, the same as just regular subtraction. So when we look at 3, 3 lines up with 1, since 3 minus 2, or 3 plus -2, is 1. And similarly, 1 will line up with -1, since 1 minus 2, or 1 plus -2, is -1. So then our answers are going to be 3 plus -2 is 1, and 1 plus -2 is -1. Since, once again, this is the same thing as 3 minus 2, and this is the same thing as 1 minus 2. So let's go on to number 2. How could you solve both of these expressions by using only one number line shift? All right, so we have 1 minus 2 and -2 plus 3. Well, as we saw in number 1, when we were adding or subtracting different things, we basically had to split it up into two situations, right? We could do A and B with one number line shift because they were both subtracting -1. And we could do C and D with one number line shift because they were both adding -2. So how are we supposed to be able to accomplish both of these in one number line shift if both of them have different operations than each other? Well, the key here is to note that doesn't matter the order in which we add things. Is 1 plus 2 the same as 2 plus 1? Well, yeah, they're both equal to 3, right? Adding is just combining things. It doesn't matter the order in which we combine them. So if that's the case, then we can actually do something kind of clever here, where if we look at B, B is -2 plus 3. But it doesn't matter the order in which we add, right? So we could also say this is the same thing as 3 plus -2, right? Since the order in which we add them doesn't matter. But what's 3 plus -2 the same as? Well, it's 3 minus 2, right? Adding a negative is the same as subtraction. And if we look at A, we have 1 minus 2. So we actually see that A and B can actually be expressed as the same operation of subtracting 2. And this means now we're going to be able to use the number line. And conveniently enough, we can just use the one from before. So this gets shifted by 2 to the left because it's adding a -2 or subtracting 2. So we move it to the left, 1, 2. and it wants us to know where 1 lines up, and it wants us to know where 3 lines up, which we actually already did from the last one. So we get that 1 minus 2 is -1, and 3 minus 2 is 1. But really the important thing here is that we were able to rearrange this by using the fact that you can add in whatever order you want in order to basically convert this expression into something that looked a lot more like this, which allowed us to compute both of these in one number line shift. All right, so moving away from number lines now, if we look at number 3, it says express the following differences as sums. So remember, a difference refers to subtraction and a sum refers to addition. So all of these here, we have things that are being subtracted, but it wants us to write it with addition instead. So the key thing to note is that subtraction is the same thing as adding a negative, right? Because they both shift in the same direction. So 5 minus 2, that's going to be 5 plus what? It's going to be 5 plus -2, right? Because the amount that we're shifting by, 2 stays the same. We just need to make sure they're both going left. When we're subtracting, that automatically goes left. And when we're adding, that goes right. So to make it go left, we have to put the negative here. Next up, we have 3 minus 1. So how would we express that in terms of addition? Well, you can almost follow the pattern here, right? We just kind of put this minus inside of a bracket here, and then we put a plus in between. But one thing to say is don't get too caught up in following patterns in math. It's way more important to just think about what's going on because you'll understand it a lot better. All right, so what's going on here is, once again, that subtraction moves to the left and adding a negative moves to the left as well. So that's why we can say that they're the same thing. And lastly, -1 minus 2. So we have -1 plus -2. And you can go ahead and justify why that's the case. It's the same reason as what we've done before. All right, so next up, express the following sums as differences. So this is similar, except we're starting with addition and we want to express it with subtraction. So addition moves to the right and subtraction moves to the left. So how do we make the subtraction move in the opposite direction? We need to subtract a negative. So we subtract -1. Right? We need to still do it by the same value, by 1, but it's just we're changing the signs now. Right? So subtraction moves to the left, but this negative means we're going in the opposite direction to the right. So this 2 minus -1 will be the same as 2 plus 1. Similarly, we have 3 plus 1. What's that going to be? It's going to be 3 minus -1. And for C, we have 1 plus 2, and that is going to be 1 minus -2. Once again, subtracting a negative gives us the same as addition. And I didn't justify these two, so go ahead and justify those as an additional exercise. All right. And lastly, we have express the following sum as a difference in 2 ways. So we have 10 plus 6 here. And it wants us to express it as a difference. So it's very similar to what we were doing in number 4, but it wants us to do it in 2 different ways. So one of them is just kind of following what we did before. That's the same thing as 10 minus -6, right? Adding 6, that's going to the right. And subtracting a negative will take us to the right as well, so they're the same thing. But how are we going to do this in another way? What do you think? Well, we're going to be using what we used here in number 2. The fact that you can do addition in any order, right? 10 plus 6 is the same thing as 6 plus 10. So we can actually rewrite this as 6 minus -10. And that's going to be the same thing because minusing a negative is the same thing as adding. So we're getting that 6 plus 10 is the same thing as 10 plus 6, and thus these two differences are the exact same thing as what we have here in number 5. All right, well, good work. And if you want some further practice, all you have to do is make up a bunch of questions with random numbers with random signs. For example, 5 plus 3 minus -2 minus 4 plus -1, right? That's a problem. All I did is I just made up numbers, changed plus and minuses around, made some of the numbers negative, and there's something you can do to practice. You can also start with a expression like this and just try and convert it into being something with a difference instead of a sum, or vice versa. All right, well, that's going to do it for me today. Good work, have a good one, stay groovy, and I'll see you in the next video.